The Atlanta Hawks decided to fire their coach, Nate McMillan, yesterday. And I just want to talk about it. Nate McMillan, I would say, is not a bad coach. For me, it's always hard to just really rank coaches in the sense of just how good they are. I would say really a good coach is a coach that can win a lot of games with, just average to mediocre talent. That's the way I look at that. Just they get the most out of that. I think any coach can win when they have a loaded team. That's why I always just feel in general coaching is very overrated. I feel in the NBA, other sports, I do believe it has higher value, but because in the NBA, I feel talent just matters so much more that for example, I feel my drunk uncle could have won 60 games per year with prime LeBron. Just because LeBron was that great, it didn't matter who his coach was. So I think to a large degree, coaching doesn't make too much of a difference in the wins and losses column, to be honest. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. The way I feel a coach can influence the game really is through substitutions, timeouts, and their ability to work the refs. That can clearly give a team an edge. All those things combined, I would say, is probably around 5 to 10% influence of the game, which leads the rest to the players, which is 90 to 95%. A, a coach that's allegedly great will be garbage when he doesn't have good talent around him. Just look at Popovich, who gets a lot of hype for being a great coach, but once he has crappy talent, he can't do anything. That's why I'm not too harsh of a judge on coaches. The only time I'm really a harsh judge is that if your team is stacked and you're just not winning games. That to me is just unacceptable, but that's rare. You really have to be terrible at your job not to win with a stacked team. That to me is a sign of just a terrible coach, a coach that's lost the locker room. But outside of that, it's really a game based on talent. Like I said, just if you have great talent, well, you're going to be a great coach. If you have terrible talent, you're going to be a shitty coach. But let's just look at Nate McMillan's overall coaching record. He's coached over 1,428 games. In his coaching career, he has won 760 games and he's lost 668 games total. That leaves him with a 53% winning percentage, which means he's a pretty good coach. He wins more games than he loses. That's what you want in a head coach, and he does that. And in 13 seasons out of the 19 he's coached, his teams have all finished with above 500 records, which is very impressive. He's gotten to the conference finals once in his coaching career. That was 2 years ago with his Hawks team that he was released from. So, do I think that Nate McMillan was a reason why the Hawks were really that bad? No. I'm sure some people could argue that he could have done certain things a little bit better, but like I said, it comes down to star players. And that's why I'm just going to bring up Trae Young's stats this year. He is Atlanta's franchise player. He's averaging 26.7 points a game. And at first, you're thinking, like, well, that's pretty good. Until you look at the field goal percentages. He's shooting 42 overall from the field, which is terrible. He's shooting a putrid 32% from three, and this is allegedly from a guy who's supposed to be the next Steph Curry. He's definitely not showing it when he's out there. He's really a terrible, inefficient chucker. That's the way I look at this guy. He's very overrated. And he just lives off that run from 2 years ago where he was able to lead the Hawks to the conference finals, which, by the way, I think was a very fluky run by the Hawks. I felt they got really lucky. They faced the Knicks team in the first round that was easy to game plan against. All they had to do was double and triple Julius, and the rest of the team just faded away. Then the second round, they played against a mental midget and Ben Simmons. If he had just shown up when it mattered, they probably would have lost that series. Just they got lucky playing just two teams that had favorable matchups. The Knicks with the easy schemes against Julius Randle, and like I said before, the Sixers with Ben Simmons. But because of that run, I think it led Atlanta to believe that Trae Young was a legit franchise player when I don't believe he is. I really don't. They list Trae Young at 6'1", but I don't even think he's even 6'1". At best, to me, he looks like he could be 6 feet, and that's just being generous. That I think he might be something like 5'11" and 3/4 of an inch or something, but he's just not tall enough. Steph Curry, if you look at him, he's a legit 6'3". That height is actually correct. He is actually that tall. Trae Young looks just very short. And I think it's very hard to win a championship or be an elite team when your best player is a midget by NBA standards. It's rare that you win a championship when you have a guy that small. If you think about it, the Pistons were the last team to win with their best player being a small guy, Isaiah Thomas. I think Isaiah was only 6'1", so that was the last time it happened. And I think about the other Pistons team in '04 with Chauncey. He was 6'2", but you can make the argument that team was just equal with their best players being Rasheed, Ben, and Rip and Chauncey. They were just equal levels of it. But it's very hard to win when your best player is a small player. You just look at those teams I mentioned that have won with their best players being small guards. Those teams were stacked. The '04 Pistons were stacked. The 80s Pistons were stacked. The Hawks were not stacked. And on top of that, Trae Young does not have the basketball IQ that Isaiah Thomas and Chauncey Billups has to make it work. He's not a basketball mind, I feel. I see the assists are high, but just I feel anybody in this era could get 9 to 10 assists. Keep in mind, Russell Westbrook was able to do that back when he was with the Thunder, and I feel it's very easy to get that many assists when you're scoring that many points because you could suck in 2-3 defenders. That allows you to just kind of cheat to some degree, but can you actually run a play when the defense is focused on you? Can you make the right plays? I don't see that from Trae Young at all. His turnovers prove that to me. He's getting you 10 assists a game, but he's getting you 4 turnovers a game, so that kind of like negates it. That means for just about every 2 assists he gives you a turnover in exchange. So that's really bad, but I don't think you can build around Trae Young. I just don't see it happening. The Hawks are now trapped with this guy. I think it'll be a while until they realize that he's not worth building a team around. And to be honest, if I was the Hawks, I would actually try to trade Young to some desperate team and get as many draft picks for him. I just don't think he's a franchise player. They're going to waste their time for the next 4 or 5 years. I don't really blame Nate McMillan for their failures this year. Even with all the turmoil he had with Trae Young, I think their record was they were close to being a 500 team, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just going to look at it right now. Let me just look at the standings in the East. I'm just going to pull it up. Just give me a second. Yeah, the Hawks were 8th place right now, and they're 29-30, so they're just a game below 500. Despite everything that was going down with Nate McMillan and Trae Young, they didn't like each other. But this is a team that's always going to be a fringe team in the sense that they're going to be somewhere in the bottom 6 to 8 slot in the East. I feel maybe to get lucky they climb to 5. However, don't ever expect this team to go on the run they went on 2 years ago. I just don't see it unless the major contenders in the East suffer injuries. It's just not going to happen. But like I said, I don't blame Nate McMillan for the Hawks' lack of success. I just think the Hawks are delusional in what they expect from Trae Young and what they think he's capable of doing. This is a typical story of a spoiled young player who's a diva and basically feels he could do whatever he wants right now since he knows he wields all the power within the organization. And just like all these other stories in the past, this will end ugly. You just have to wait. Just give it a year or two, and let's see how long he's going to be able to keep his composure before he starts pouting and he wants to leave Atlanta when it's actually his fault for why they lose, but he'll blame them for it and then ask out like a lot of these other stars do instead of accepting responsibility that they're the reason why their teams suck. That's how I feel about this, and that's all I have to say.